Imagine this. You're standing at the threshold of a life-changing opportunity. It could be a promotion you've been working toward for years, the launch of a business idea you've nurtured quietly, or simply the chance to speak your heart to someone you truly care about. Your pulse quickens, your palms start to sweat, and a relentless voice whispers in your mind, "What if I fail? What if they reject me?" Instead of stepping forward, you hesitate, you retreat, and in that silent retreat, the opportunity slips away, leaving behind only an ache and the echo of regret. This isn't a rare story. In fact, surveys show that more than a third of adults in the United States admit they fear failure more than those who fear spiders, the dark, or even the supernatural. Nearly half confess that their fear of failure is so intense it paralyzes them, stopping them from acting at all. They don't apply for the job. They don't start the business. They don't take the risk. They simply freeze, and in our modern society, this fear has become even more severe. We live in a culture that worships success, glorifies winners, and often measures a person's worth by their achievements, income, or social standing. That creates a silent but crushing pressure. If you fail, you don't just lose the opportunity, you risk losing your identity, your sense of value, even your dignity. For many middle-aged men, the weight of this fear is heavier than ever. They carry the responsibility of family, career, and reputation. They've worked hard to build a stable life, and the idea of losing it all, being judged unworthy, feels unbearable. And so, they hold back. They take fewer risks. They play it safe. But let me ask you, how many times have you wanted to apply for a position but stopped because you feared rejection? How many times have you wanted to start a conversation with someone new but remained silent because you thought they might not care? How many times have you carried a bold idea but kept it hidden because you worried people would laugh? Every time we choose avoidance, we gain temporary safety. But that safety is costly. It steals opportunities for growth. It robs us of change. It keeps us trapped in the familiar, comfortable, perhaps, but stagnant. And the fear isn't limited to work. In our personal lives, the fear of rejection infiltrates every conversation, every glance, every potential connection. It makes us cautious when making new friends, hesitant to share our feelings, and reluctant to step into unfamiliar environments. Many men retreat into a shell, protecting themselves from rejection, but also cutting themselves off from connection. Here's the truth. Failure and rejection themselves are not the real problem. The real problem is the meaning we attach to them. We tell ourselves that failure proves we are weak, that it destroys our reputation, that it reveals we are not enough. We interpret rejection as evidence that we are unworthy of love or respect. And it's these judgments, not the events themselves, that wound us most deeply. Psychologists call this the trap of self-worth contingency, the belief that your value depends entirely on external results. When you succeed, you feel worthy. When you fail, you feel worthless. But here's the danger. Outcomes are never fully under your control. You can prepare, you can try, you can do your best, but the result still depends on countless factors beyond you. If your sense of self is chained to those results, you're doomed to a life of anxiety. In the US and the UK, society is built on competition, achievement, and performance. This trap is everywhere. People postpone dreams of entrepreneurship because they fear failure. They hesitate in relationships because they fear rejection. And so, we find ourselves surrounded by individuals who live far beneath their true potential, shackled not by real failure, but by the anticipation of it. But here's what's fascinating. 2,000 years ago, in a world ravaged by political instability, wars, and the ever-present fragility of life, the Stoic philosophers already had an answer. To them, failure was not a disgrace, and rejection was not a disaster. They saw these events as neutral, stripped of any inherent meaning. The only meaning they carried was the meaning we chose to assign. Epictetus, a former slave-turned-philosopher, famously said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of them. In other words, failure is only failure if you decide to call it that. Look at it differently, and it becomes something else. A teacher, a stepping stone, a new beginning." Marcus Aurelius, the emperor-philosopher, reminded himself daily that what feels painful today may be the very material for tomorrow's strength. To the Stoics, setbacks were not signs of weakness, they were exercises, training grounds for the soul. So here's the question for you. If there were a set of tools, a way of thinking, that could help you strip fear of its power, not by promising you'll never fail, but by changing how you meet failure, would you want to learn it? Because that's exactly what Stoicism offers. And in the coming parts of this journey, we'll explore 5 deceptively simple Stoic questions that have the power to reshape how you see failure and rejection. We'll start with questions that are practical and easy to apply, then gradually move into deeper, more profound territory. By the end, you'll reach a question so powerful, it can completely transform your relationship with fear. This is not about quick hacks or shallow tricks. It's about reclaiming control over your own mind, your own judgments, and ultimately, your own freedom. When we look at the roots of fear, whether it is the fear of failure or the fear of rejection, we find ourselves caught in the same trap. We mistake outcomes for identity. If I fail, then I am a failure. If I am rejected, then I am unworthy. That thought pattern is the invisible chain that keeps so many men and women from even trying. But there is a philosophy, born 2,000 years ago, that offers a different way to see the world. It is not a self-help hack, not a quick motivational trick, but a way of training the mind to meet life as it is. This philosophy is Stoicism. Many people today misunderstand Stoicism. They imagine a rigid, cold detachment, as if the Stoic ideal is to feel nothing at all. But if you read the words of Epictetus, Seneca, or Marcus Aurelius, you find something entirely different. You find warmth, clarity, and a deep humanity. Stoicism is not about killing emotion. It is about removing the unnecessary suffering we pile on top of events by our judgments. The Stoics understood a truth that modern psychology has rediscovered. Much of our pain does not come from what happens, but from the way we interpret what happens. Epictetus, born into slavery and later freed, captured this truth in a line that has outlived empires. Some things are up to us and some things are not. That sentence alone is a weapon against fear. Because when you accept that outcomes are not fully in your control, you can finally stop equating them with your worth. A rejection letter is not proof that you are worthless. It is proof that the decision was outside your power. What remains in your power is how you applied, how you prepared, how you held yourself with dignity in the process. And when you can separate those two realms, fear begins to lose its teeth. Marcus Aurelius, who carried the unimaginable burden of ruling Rome during wars and plagues, reminded himself every day of this truth. In his private journal, the Meditations, he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Picture the weight on his shoulders, betrayals in the Senate, enemies at the borders, even the death of his children. He could not control those things, but he could control the way he met them. He could govern his own response. That is what made him strong, not an illusion of control over the world, but mastery of the self. Seneca, writing to a younger friend, offered another practice. He advised imagining difficulties in advance, a practice he called the premeditation of evils. The point was not to live in dread, but to disarm dread by facing it before it arrives. He who has anticipated the coming of troubles, Seneca said, takes away their power when they arrive. Imagine applying this to your own fear. Instead of whispering to yourself, "I hope nothing goes wrong," you could say, "Things will go wrong, and I will be ready." This reframing turns fear into preparation. It transforms anxiety into resilience. And then there's a concept often called the crown jewel of Stoic resilience, amorphoti, the love of fate. Though the phrase became famous through Nietzsche centuries later, the heart of the idea is deeply Stoic. It is not enough to tolerate what happens. You must embrace it. You must learn to look at rejection and failure and say, "This too belongs. This too has a place in my life. This too can serve me." Imagine if you could face every setback, not with bitterness, but with curiosity. Imagine if every no became an invitation to grow stronger, every closed door a redirection toward another path you had not yet seen. That is not wishful thinking. That is a discipline of the mind. Now, pause for a moment and think about what this means for the culture we live in. We are told that failure is final. We are told that rejection is humiliation. But the Stoics tell us the opposite. Failure is feedback. Rejection is information, and neither touches the core of who you are. Your worth is not tied to the outcome of an interview, a promotion, a relationship, or a business venture. Your worth lies in the effort, the integrity, and the character you bring to each attempt. That is why Stoicism remains such a powerful antidote to the anxieties of our time. It does not remove the possibility of failure. It does not guarantee success. What it offers is something much greater: the courage to act, the resilience to endure, and the wisdom to grow, no matter what happens. It teaches us that true dignity does not come from never falling, but from the way we rise again after the fall. And this is the point where philosophy becomes practical. The Stoics did not leave us only with grand principles. They gave us tools, questions we can ask ourselves in daily life, questions that pierce through fear and lead us back to clarity. Over the next part of our journey, we will walk through 5 of those questions. Each one is simple to state, but powerful in its effect. Each one strips away a layer of fear, and as we go deeper, the questions become more challenging, more searching, until we arrive at the final one, a question so radical it can dissolve the roots of fear entirely. If you are willing to walk with me through all 5, you may never look at failure or rejection in the same way again. The first Stoic question we need to ask when fear grips us is deceptively simple. What is the worst that can happen? At first glance, this may sound almost too obvious. After all, when we're afraid of failure or rejection, aren't we already thinking about the worst outcome? The difference, though, lies in the clarity of examination. Most of the time, we don't actually face the worst case directly. We let it hover as a vague shadow in our mind. And because it is vague, it grows monstrous. Fear thrives in uncertainty. When you bring it into the open, when you say it out loud, when you name the specific consequence you're afraid of, the shadow shrinks. Seneca, one of the great Roman Stoics, often advised his students to practice this exercise of visualization. If you fear losing money, imagine being without it. If you fear being disgraced, imagine what it would mean to live with that disgrace. His point was not to depress or discourage, but to show that the human spirit can endure far more than we think. And when you realize that endurance is possible, fear loosens its grip. Think about your own life. Maybe you hesitate to apply for a new position because you fear not being selected. But what is the worst that can happen? You receive a rejection email, perhaps some disappointment, perhaps a bruise to the ego, but then life goes on. Or maybe you are afraid to confess your feelings to someone. What is the worst that can happen? They say no, you feel hurt, maybe there's a moment of awkwardness. But again, life continues. In both cases, the catastrophic images that kept you frozen collapse into something survivable, even ordinary. Now, of course, not every worst case is so light. Some failures bring real consequences, financial loss, public embarrassment, strained relationships. Yet even then, clarity helps. If you imagine the exact hardship, say, having to start again from scratch, or needing to borrow support from friends, you can then begin to see possible paths forward. Instead of being paralyzed by the fog of what if, you begin to map out what next. And once you see a path, even a difficult one, fear loses its ability to immobilize you. The Stoics would remind us here that nature has made us resilient. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He was pointing to the truth that our mental rehearsal of disaster is usually far worse than disaster itself. Think of the nights you lay awake fearing the worst. Think of how rarely the reality was as unbearable as the mind imagined. And if you reflect honestly, you might find that even your most painful failures became the source of later growth. There is also a paradox worth noticing. By clearly identifying the worst case, you sometimes discover that your real fear is not the event itself, but the opinion of others. You worry not just about failing, but about being seen as a failure. Not just about rejection, but about others knowing you were rejected. And when you recognize that layer, you can challenge it. Is my value really so fragile that it depends on whispers and judgments? Or is it rooted in my own character, in my willingness to try, in my ability to endure? The Stoics would argue it is the latter. So I'll ask you directly, what is your fear whispering to you right now? What is the worst outcome it dangles in front of your mind? And if you looked at that outcome with clear eyes, not through the haze of dread, would it still hold the same power? Or would you see that even in the worst case, you can continue, you can rebuild, you can carry yourself with dignity? This is the first Stoic question. It is not meant to eliminate fear in a single moment, but to bring fear out of the shadows. When the imagination inflates possibilities into monsters, clarity is your sword. Ask, what is the worst that can happen? And you may find that the answer, though uncomfortable, is rarely fatal. More often than not, it is survivable. And in survivability, there is freedom. As we move forward, the next Stoic question will take us even deeper. It will ask us to confront not only our fears, but the very boundaries of control in our lives. Because it is one thing to imagine the worst case. It is another to realize what parts of that case are truly in your hands, and what parts are not. The second Stoic question builds directly on the first. Once you've asked yourself, what is the worst that can happen? You now have to confront another, deeper question. Is this within my control? Epictetus made this the very foundation of his teaching. In the opening lines of the Enchiridion, he wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." Simple words, but they contain the key to peace of mind. If what you feel lies within your control, then you can act. If it does not, then your fear is wasted energy. Consider a situation at work. You fear that a presentation might go poorly. What is within your control? You can prepare your slides carefully. You can rehearse. You can refine your message. But what is outside your control? The mood of the audience, the opinions they bring into the room. Whether your boss is distracted or already frustrated about something else, the outcome, whether people applaud or criticize, does not fully belong to you. Only your effort does. And when you see that distinction, your fear begins to shrink. The same applies in relationships. Suppose you want to ask someone out, but you fear rejection. What is within your control? The way you approach them, the sincerity of your words, the respect you show. What is not within your control? Their response, their timing, their personal circumstances, which you may never fully know. Fear thrives when we confuse these two spheres, when we think we must control what is not ours. But freedom begins the moment we admit, oh, my choices, not their outcomes. This shift is not easy, because society constantly tells us otherwise. We are told to make things happen, to control our destiny, to guarantee success. But the Stoics offer a sobering and liberating alternative. You cannot control outcomes. You can only control the character you bring into the attempt. And that is enough. Think of Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet wrote in his journal every night to remind himself that even as emperor, he could not control the world. He could not command the plague to stop, or enemies to surrender, or friends to stay loyal. But he could command himself. He could control the way he responded with justice, with courage, with temperance, with wisdom. And that was his true power. So let me ask you, how much of your own fear comes from trying to control the uncontrollable? How much energy do you spend rehearsing what someone else will think of you, or how they will respond, or what judgment they will pass? None of that belongs to you. What belongs to you is the courage to show up, the integrity to act honestly, the discipline to prepare well. That is your domain. That is your kingdom. When you learn to separate the controllable from the uncontrollable, something remarkable happens. Rejection still stings, but it no longer defines you. Failure still hurts, but it no longer crushes you. Because in every case, you can say, I did what was mine to do. I acted with courage. I upheld my principles. The rest was never mine to command. This is the second Stoic question. Is this within my control? It is the compass that points you back to your center when fear tries to drag you outward. Ask it often. Ask it before the meeting, before the conversation, before the leap into the unknown. And when you do, you will discover a truth the Stoics lived by. Freedom is not the ability to control everything. Freedom is the ability to let go of what is not yours and to stand firm in what is not as we move on. The third question will take us even further. It will ask not just what lies within your control, but what you can gain even in the face of loss. Because sometimes the greatest gift of failure is the lesson it leaves behind. This question changes everything, because it shifts the meaning of failure itself. Up until now, failure has appeared as the end of the road, a final judgment that says, you are not good enough. But if you ask what lesson you will gain, failure becomes something else entirely. It becomes a teacher. It becomes part of the process, not the end of it. Seneca reminded his students that difficulty is the training ground of virtue. He wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Think about what that implies. Just as lifting a heavy weight breaks down your muscles so they can grow stronger, encountering setbacks breaks down your assumptions so your mind can expand. Without resistance, there is no growth. Without mistakes, there is no refinement. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Chances are, some of your most valuable lessons didn't come from smooth victories. They came from the jobs you didn't get, the relationships that didn't work, the projects that fell apart. Each of those experiences forced you to adapt, to sharpen, to see something you could not see before. In hindsight, they were not simply failures. They were investments in wisdom. Thomas Edison famously said, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. He reframed failure as progress, each attempt narrowing the path toward success. That mindset is profoundly Stoic. A rejection letter becomes feedback. A lost deal becomes insight. A broken relationship becomes clarity about what you value. The question is never, did I fail? The question is always, what did I learn? Now, this doesn't mean we pretend failure is pleasant. The Stoics were not naive. They knew the sting of disappointment, the ache of rejection, but they also knew that those feelings could be endured, and more than endured, they could be transformed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, the very obstacle that blocks you becomes the path that strengthens you if you choose to treat it that way. Imagine, for instance, a man who starts a business that collapses within a year. From one perspective, he has failed. His finances suffer. His reputation takes a hit. But if he asks the Stoic question, "What lesson will I gain?" suddenly the story changes. He learns about resilience. He learns how to manage risk more wisely. He learns the value of persistence. Those lessons become seeds for the future, and in time, he may look back and realize that what felt like an ending was actually a beginning. Or consider a personal example. You express your feelings to someone and they turn you down. Painful, yes, but what lesson emerges? Perhaps you learn to separate your worth from another's acceptance. Perhaps you learn how to handle rejection with grace. Perhaps you discover that your courage to speak honestly matters more than their answer. Each of these lessons adds to your strength. So let me ask you, what if every failure you've experienced was already shaping you into the person you are today? What if the setbacks you once cursed were actually the raw material of your growth? How differently would you look at the next challenge if you knew in advance that, succeed or fail, you would still walk away richer in wisdom? This is the third Stoic question, and it is a powerful one. It doesn't erase failure, it redefines it. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" you ask, "What will I learn when I do?" And once you see every failure as a source of learning, fear begins to lose its ability to hold you hostage. Because no matter what happens, you win either with success or with insight. And as we move forward, the fourth question will push us even deeper. It will challenge the very foundation of how we measure ourselves. It will ask not just what lesson failure gives, but what truly defines our value as human beings. The fourth Stoic question strikes at the heart of fear. It asks, what truly defines my value? This question matters because most of our fear of failure and rejection comes from a hidden assumption that our worth as human beings is tied to the results we produce or the approval we receive. If I succeed, then I am valuable. If others applaud me, then I matter. But if I stumble, if I am criticized, if someone says no, then I am diminished. That belief is the silent driver behind much of our anxiety, and Stoicism dismantles it completely. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who could have measured his worth by the size of his empire, instead reminded himself daily that true value lies in character, not circumstance. In Meditations, he wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." From Marcus, power did not come from wealth, fame, or conquest. Power came from aligning his actions with virtue, justice, courage, wisdom, temperance. Those were the only measures of worth he recognized. This runs directly against the messages of modern society. Today, value is constantly equated with productivity, salary, beauty, or social status. The message is clear. You are only as good as your last achievement, your last promotion, your last Instagram post. No wonder failure feels devastating. No wonder rejection feels like annihilation. If your worth depends on applause, then silence is unbearable. But the Stoics remind us of something different. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, did not have titles or wealth. Yet his teachings still echo across centuries. He said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Imagine the courage it takes to live that way, to let go of the fear of opinion, to anchor your value in integrity rather than perception. Epictetus could endure humiliation because his worth did not depend on the judgment of others. It depended on the quality of his choices. So let me ask you, what defines your value? Is it the paycheck you bring home, the admiration you receive, the titles beside your name? Or is it something deeper, your honesty, your perseverance, your ability to stand back up after being knocked down? Consider the example of a father who builds a business that ultimately fails. By the world's standards, he is unsuccessful. By the Stoic measure, he may be priceless because his children watch him face hardship with dignity, resilience, and love. His worth lies not in the outcome of the business, but in the example he sets. Or think of someone who confesses love and is rejected. By society's rules, they have lost. But by Stoic rules, they have shown courage, authenticity, and self-respect. And those qualities are worth more than any fleeting approval. When you truly internalize this, something profound happens. Failure no longer feels like the end of your identity, because your identity is not built on outcomes. Rejection no longer destroys your sense of self, because your self is grounded in something unshakable. You are not defined by what others give or withhold. You are defined by what you bring. Your virtues, your values, your integrity. This fourth question, what truly defines my value, is one you must return to again and again, because the world will constantly try to pull you back into its shallow definitions. It will tell you that you matter only when you succeed, only when you're wanted, only when you win. And if you believe it, you will live in constant fear. But if you choose the Stoic path, if you root your value in character, then failure loses its sting, rejection loses its poison. You will still feel pain, but you will not be shattered. And that brings us to the final Stoic question, the most radical of all. Because once you know that failure does not define you, and rejection cannot diminish you, the last step is to embrace even those very experiences, not just to endure them, but to love them. That is where the deepest freedom lies. The fifth and final Stoic question is the most challenging and perhaps the most liberating. If fate has chosen this failure or rejection from me, can I embrace it? This is not about mere tolerance. It is not about gritting your teeth and surviving. It is about something far deeper. Amor forti, the love of fate. The Stoics believed that everything that happens, no matter how painful, arrives as raw material for your growth. To resist fate is to fight against the very nature of life itself. To love fate is to align yourself with reality and transform every obstacle into fuel. Now, pause for a moment and imagine what that means in practice. You pour your heart into a project, and it collapses. You step into a relationship, and it ends. You take a risk, and the outcome is loss. The instinctive reaction is anger, bitterness, self-pity. But the Stoic practice invites a different response. Instead of saying, "Why me?" you say, "Yes, me. This too belongs to me. This too has a place in my story." Marcus Aurelius practiced this every day. He faced betrayal, illness, grief, and endless pressure as emperor. Yet in his journal, he wrote, "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." To him, even suffering was fuel. Every difficulty was kindling for the fire of his character. Nothing was wasted. Think about how this changes the way we meet rejection. Instead of seeing it as evidence of inadequacy, we see it as training. It teaches patience. It teaches humility. It strengthens resilience. Failure, too, becomes not an enemy, but an ally. It humbles us when our pride grows too large. It teaches us to adapt when our plans are too rigid. It shapes us into people who can endure. Consider a modern example. A man builds a business for years, only to watch it collapse in an economic downturn. He could curse fate. He could grow bitter, carrying his failure like a scarlet letter. Or he could practice amor forti. He could say, "This loss, painful as it is, has given me lessons I could not have learned otherwise. It has revealed who my true friends are. It has shown me the depth of my resilience. It has redirected me toward a new path. Fate has not ruined me. Fate has refined me." Or think of rejection in love. To be turned away can feel humiliating, unbearable even. But what if, instead of clinging to resentment, you choose to embrace it as part of your journey? What if you could say, "This rejection has freed me to discover someone more aligned with me. or to grow in ways I could not have otherwise. Instead of poison, rejection becomes medicine, bitter at first, but healing in time. This final question is not easy. It is not comfortable. It demands a radical shift in how you see life. But if you can even begin to practice it, fear begins to dissolve at its roots. Because what can you fear if even failure is embraced? What can paralyze you if even rejection is welcomed? When you can say yes to whatever life hands you, then you become untouchable. You no longer beg for a certainty, because you have made peace with uncertainty. You no longer cling to control, because you have chosen acceptance, and that is the Stoic path. Not to avoid pain, but to transform it. Not to guarantee success, but to rise above fear. When you ask yourself, if fate has chosen this failure, can I embrace it? You are stepping into the deepest form of freedom, the freedom to live fully, to risk boldly, to act with courage, knowing that whatever the outcome, you cannot be defeated. This is the fifth Stoic question, and it is the culmination of all the others. First, we faced fear by naming the worst. Then, we distinguished what lies in our control. We reframed failure as a lesson. We redefined what gives us value. And finally, we embrace even the hardest blows as part of our destiny. With these 5 questions, fear loses its chains. Failure loses its sting. Rejection loses its poison. And you, at last, are free to live. So here we are. We've walked through 5 questions that the Stoics would have us ask when fear threatens to paralyze us. Each question strips away a layer of illusion, a layer of unnecessary suffering, until what remains is clarity and courage. First, we asked, what is the worst that can happen? And by naming the worst, we discovered that fear thrives in the shadows of imagination. Clarity shrinks the monster. Second, we asked, is this within my control? And we realized that most of what we fear lies outside our hands. The only thing we ever truly command is our effort, our attitude, our choices. Third, we asked, if I fail, what lesson will I gain? And suddenly failure was no longer the end. It became a teacher, offering us wisdom we could not have acquired any other way. Fourth, we asked, what truly defines my value? And we saw that our worth is not chained to outcomes or opinions. It rests in character, in the virtues we live by, in the integrity we carry into every moment. And finally, we asked, if fate has chosen this failure, can I embrace it? That question took us to the deepest level, where even rejection and loss are no longer enemies, but parts of our story, fuel for the fire that makes us strong. These 5 questions are not quick fixes. They are not tricks to hack your way through life. They are practices, disciplines of the mind, ways of living that require repetition. They demand honesty. They demand courage. But if you return to them again and again, you will notice something shift. Fear will no longer sit in the driver's seat of your life. It may still whisper, but it will not rule you. And that, in itself, is freedom. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Over the next week, whenever fear of failure or rejection rises up in you, don't just try to push it aside. Don't drown it out with distraction. Stop. Ask one of these questions. Maybe start with the simplest. What is the worst that can happen? See how it feels to answer honestly. Or ask, is this within my control? Notice how much weight falls away when you admit what is not yours to carry. Each time you practice, you train the mind. And, like any muscle, with practice, it grows stronger. Because here is the truth. Life will not stop testing you. You will face more setbacks. You will face more rejection. But that does not have to be a sentence of despair. It can be a training ground for resilience. It can be the forge where your character is shaped. The Stoics understood that, and so can we. If you found value in this journey, I invite you to carry it further. Subscribe to this channel, Not just to add another notification to your phone, but to commit to walking the Stoic path with me week by week, question by question, lesson by lesson. Share this with someone you know who struggles with fear, because none of us are free until we all learn to see failure for what it truly is, not the end, but the beginning of growth. And as you leave this conversation, remember Marcus Aurelius's words: "A blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it." Let your life be that fire. Let failure and rejection become the kindling that fuels your strength. And let courage, not fear, be the voice that guides you forward.